She sat in the back corner of the most expensive restaurant she had ever been invited to, watching the ice in her water glass slowly die, and she thought, "I should have eaten lunch." The reservation had been for 8 o'clock. It was now 11:17. Nora Callahan. No, wrong file. The woman sitting alone in booth 12 of Sable & Stone, Boston's most aggressively exclusive steakhouse, was named Poppy Vance, 29 years old. Staff accountant at a mid-sized property management firm in the financial district. The kind of woman who triple-checked spreadsheets at midnight, not because her boss asked her to, but because she physically could not sleep knowing a single cell might be off. She wore a size 18. She had a laugh that filled entire rooms and a habit of making herself small enough that no one would notice she had entered them. Tonight, she had tried something different. The dress was burgundy, floor length. It had a deep V-neck line that she had spent 4 days working up the nerve to leave the house in. The woman at the boutique in Newbury Street had clapped her hands together when Poppy stepped out of the dressing room and said, "You look like someone's entire problem," and Poppy had bought it on the spot, on a card she normally reserved for emergencies. She had skipped dinner. She had skipped lunch. She had spent 40 minutes shaping her dark curls into something that resembled intentional elegance, and then another 20 convincing herself she deserved to walk into a place like Sable & Stone looking the way she looked. His name, according to his profile on the dating app, was Derek Foss, 34, portfolio strategist, divorced, no children, passionate about sailing, and, apparently, curvy women, a preference he had stated in writing specifically in his bio, which Poppy had screenshot and sent to her sister with the caption, "Is this a trap?" Her sister had written back, "Go. Worst case, you get a free steak." There was no steak. There was sparkling water. There was a bread basket she had steadily dismantled over 4 hours. There was a young waiter named Calvin who kept reappearing with sympathetic eyes and fresh lemon wedges, and every time he approached, Poppy felt the humiliation calcify a little more in the center of her chest. "Can I get you anything else while you wait? He's just running late. Traffic on the Pike can be brutal this time of night. Take all the time you need, miss." She had stopped making excuses to Calvin somewhere around the 2nd hour. By the 3rd, she had simply smiled at him with the tired patience of a woman who had revised her opinion of herself downward in real time and no longer had the energy to pretend otherwise. She had not dressed for this restaurant. She had dressed for a man who thought she was worth booking a reservation at it. Those were two very different things, and the gap between them had spent 4 hours widening into something that felt permanent. At 11:19, Poppy Vance picked up her clutch, small, black, borrowed from her sister, blocked Derek Foss's number without rereading any of his messages, and stood up. She was done. She had actually pushed back from the table and risen to her full height, the burgundy dress falling in a long, clean line to the floor, when the restaurant stopped. Not loudly. Not with a crash or a shout. It stopped the way power goes out in a building, all at once, silently, with a completeness that made you understand something fundamental had changed. The murmur of conversation across 40 tables died. The piano in the corner, a live pianist working through something understated and French, trailed off in the middle of a phrase. The maitre, a slender man named Forsyth, who had looked at Poppy with transparent pity when she'd arrived alone, went visibly pale at something happening near the front entrance. Poppy turned. 3 men came through the front doors of Sable & Stone in a way that suggested they had never once in their lives waited to be seated. They wore dark suits, and the particular stillness of people trained to look relaxed while being extraordinarily dangerous. They didn't rush. They didn't speak. They spread out across the entrance with the practiced efficiency of a military formation and stood there, hands loose at their sides, radiating a silence that was louder than any sound. The man who walked in behind them was the reason the room had stopped breathing. He was tall, Not the generic tall of a man who played basketball in high school, but the tall of a man whose height seemed to be a deliberate statement about how much space he was entitled to occupy. Dark hair, cut close on the sides, longer on top, swept back with no visible effort. A jaw that looked like it had been drawn by someone who had strong feelings about straight lines. He wore a charcoal suit with the ease of a man who had never once in his life worried about whether something fit. His eyes, when they swept the room, were the particular shade of grey that exists between a storm and the sea after it. Not cold exactly, but deeply, precisely evaluating. Poppy recognized him. She had never met him. She doubted anyone in the room had met him socially, but his face had appeared on the cover of Boston Magazine 3 years ago, above a headline that read "The Man the FBI Cannot Touch," and she had read that article twice because she found it, against every reasonable instinct, genuinely fascinating. Dorian Ashby, 41 years old. Legitimate on paper, a shipping conglomerate, a real estate portfolio, a private equity fund with impeccable returns. Illegitimate in practice. The operating head of the Ashby Syndicate, the organization that had quietly controlled Boston's port infrastructure, its construction contracts, and 3 city council seats for the better part of 2 decades. He had been investigated 4 times by federal authorities. Charges had been filed twice. Both times, key witnesses had developed a sudden, comprehensive inability to recall anything they had previously reported. He was here in Sable and Stone at 11:20 on a Tuesday night. One of the suited men, dark-skinned, scar running through his left eyebrow, expression like a man professionally unimpressed by everything, stepped forward and addressed the dining room. "The restaurant is closed for the evening. Please leave through the kitchen exit. Leave your belongings at the table. Do not use your phones." Nobody argued. Nobody asked for the check. A table of 4 near the window simply stood up and walked, the woman at the end of it still holding her wineglass before thinking better of it and setting it down with the careful precision of someone diffusing a device. Within 3 minutes, Sable and Stone was empty. Almost. Poppy had not moved. This was partly because she was standing between her booth and the aisle, and the exit required her to walk past the man by the door, and her body had made an executive decision to stay precisely where it was. But it was also, in some unavoidable way, because she was so tired. Tired of being overlooked, tired of the humiliation of the evening, tired of moving, tired of being a person who made herself small to accommodate the comfort of other people, that she had run out of the particular energy required to be afraid. She was still standing there, clutch in hand, when Dorian Ashby crossed the empty restaurant and stopped at her table. Up close, he was worse, or better. The distinction seemed increasingly theoretical. He smelled of sandalwood, and something dark and expensive she couldn't name, and he looked down at her with grey eyes that registered her, actually registered her, catalogued her face, her dress, the bread basket, the empty seat, the glass of water with its dead ice, with a thoroughness that made her feel simultaneously seen and dissected. He sat down in the seat across from her. He hadn't asked. "You must be the bookkeeper," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice calibrated over years to never have to rise above a certain volume and still be obeyed. Poppy blinked. The word landed strangely. "I'm sorry. Derek Foss's contact." Ashby leaned back in the booth with the relaxed authority of a man sitting in his own home. His inside source at the property firm. The name hit her like cold water. She heard herself say, "Derek," in a voice that didn't sound like hers.
"You know Derek Foss?"
Dorian Ashby's expression did not change significantly, but something behind his eyes shifted into a sharper register. "He worked for me. Contract basis. Clean money through legitimate real estate transactions." He looked at the empty seat again, then back at her. "He was supposed to meet someone here tonight. He told my people it was a professional contact, someone with access to the account routing for the Meridian properties. Poppy stared at him. I'm not a bookkeeper for anyone named Meridian. Her voice was almost steady. I do payroll and accounts receivable for a property management company called Dunmore and Lang. I met Derek on Hinge 6 weeks ago. He told me he liked smart women, and he'd never been to Sable and Stone, even though he'd always wanted to. And he made the reservation and asked me to meet him here at 8 o'clock. She set her clutch down on the table with a precision that surprised her. And then he didn't come. Dorian Ashby looked at her for a long, measuring moment. How long have you been here? 4 hours. Something moved across his face. Not quite pity. Something more complicated than that, and more careful. He told my associates he was coming here to hand off a drive containing the financial documentation for a series of shell accounts. Ashby's voice was almost conversational. $3 million in routing numbers and subsidiary registrations that belong to my organization, and that Derek Foss stole, apparently, over the course of 8 months, while processing our legitimate real estate transactions. Poppy understood, all at once, the full architecture of her evening. Derek Foss had not stood her up because he was a coward or a flake, or a man who had never actually intended to show. He had stood her up because he was a thief on the run from organized crime, and he had used her, her face, her reservation, her patient presence in this booth, as a visible, trackable placeholder. He had given the Ashby Syndicate a location. He had given them a woman to find. And then he had used the 3 hours he bought himself to disappear. She had worn the dress for this. She had skipped lunch for this. She had sat in this restaurant for 4 hours, being looked at with pity by a waiter named Calvin, feeling herself shrink incrementally with every passing half hour, spending the evening quietly revising her own worth downward. And the entire time, she had been a prop, a decoy, a human distraction constructed out of her own loneliness and a man's calculation that no one would look twice at a plus-size woman waiting alone in the corner. The fury that moved through her was not the hot, messy kind. It was white and clean and absolute. That son of a bitch, Poppy said. Dorian Ashby raised an eyebrow. 6 weeks. Her voice was controlled and terrible. 6 weeks of good morning texts. He told me I had the kind of face that made him nervous. He said he specifically liked. She stopped, pressed her lips together. Do you know how long I spent on my hair tonight? Ashby said nothing. I told my sister I was finally going on a real date. I have not been on a date in 14 months. I was going to order the dry-aged ribeye. She looked directly at the man who ran the Boston underworld. He used me as a distraction. Yes, Dorian Ashby said. He did, because who's going to look at the fat girl in the corner? The words came out, clipped and precise, with the particular clarity of a woman who had had exactly this thought 30 times tonight, and was finally saying it out loud to someone. I was invisible. He knew I was invisible. He built his escape plan on it. The man across from her was quiet for a moment that lasted several seconds longer than comfortable. You're not invisible, he said. The words were not gentle. They were stated, flatly, like a correction to a mathematical error. You are the most visible person in this restaurant. You have been since you walked in. His eyes moved over her face with that same deliberate precision. I noticed you before I reached the table. Poppy looked at him. My problem, he continued, as if they were discussing a logistical matter, is that Foss has a 3-hour head start, and my people cannot find him. My other problem is that he told at least 2 people in my organization that his contact at the property firm had access to the Meridian account documentation. Whether or not that's true, he paused. Others will assume it is. The implication settled over her, like the temperature dropping. You're saying whoever else he owes money to will come looking for the woman he was supposed to meet tonight. Yes. Poppy sat back down slowly. Not because she chose to, because her legs made the decision. You should come with me, Dorian Ashby said. It was not phrased as a request. It was not quite an order. It existed in the particular register of a man who was accustomed to people doing what he said. and had simply never developed the grammatical infrastructure for asking. Until we find Foss and resolve the account situation, you're exposed. I can call the police, Poppy said, and even as she said it, she heard how it sounded. Dorian Ashby looked at her with the patient expression of a man who had heard this sentence before. Right. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course, you have two options. He stood, straightening his jacket with one motion. You go home, alone, and spend the next 48 hours hoping that the people Derek Foss owes $3 million to are slow and thorough in their research. Or, he extended his hand, palm up across the table, an offering that was also a statement. You come with me, and I guarantee that no one touches you. Why would you do that? Poppy looked at his hand, then at his face. I have nothing to do with this. I'm collateral damage. You have no reason to protect me. Dorian Ashby's grey eyes held hers for a moment, with a directness that was entirely different from being looked through. Foss made you part of this the moment he used you, he said. That makes it my problem to correct. Something shifted in his expression, a fractional thing, barely visible, like the surface of deep water disturbed from below. And I find that I have a limited tolerance for watching someone else's mistake cost a woman who did nothing wrong. Poppy looked at his extended hand for 3 full seconds. Then she put her clutch under her arm, stood up in her burgundy dress, and took it. The compound was not what she had expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. Something louder, maybe, more dramatic, more consistent with the way crime looked in movies. What she got was a brownstone on Beacon Hill that looked, from the outside, like the home of a particularly successful cardiologist. Inside, it was another matter. High ceilings, dark wood, the kind of quiet that came not from emptiness but from very good soundproofing and the collective discipline of the people who moved through it. Men appeared and disappeared in hallways. Doors opened and closed. Everything functioned with a seamless, organized efficiency that Poppy, despite herself, recognized and appreciated. She was given a room on the 3rd floor. It had a window that looked onto a courtyard. It had fresh towels and a closet containing clothing in what turned out to be exactly her size, which she chose not to examine too closely. At 12:40 in the morning, there was a knock on the door. There's been a development. The man with the scar through his eyebrow, she had learned his name was Carver, stood in the doorway. The boss wants you downstairs. The development was this: Derek Foss, who had vanished from Boston entirely, had made contact. He had not called Dorian Ashby. He had called Poppy. She stood in the kitchen of the Beacon Hill brownstone. Warm light, marble countertops, a level of domestic normalcy wildly inconsistent with the 2 armed men standing by the door, and looked at her phone screen. 14 missed calls. All from the number she had blocked. He had called from a different phone. Dorian Ashby stood beside her, reading the screen over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. Answer it, he said quietly. Speaker. She took a breath and called back. Derek Foss picked up on the first ring. Poppy. He sounded breathless. Not the breathless of someone who had been running, but the breathless of someone who had been afraid for a sustained period and was beginning to unravel at the seams. Thank God. Are you okay? Are you still at the restaurant? I'm home, she said. Her voice was remarkable. Even she was impressed by it. What is going on, Derek? The restaurant was evacuated. There were men with, I know, listen to me. The charm was still there, barely, like paint over something, rotting. I need you to do something for me. It's important. I need you to check your email. Poppy frowned. My email? About 2 weeks ago, I sent you a link. I told you it was a restaurant recommendation app, a waiting list thing for exclusive bookings. Do you remember? She did remember. She had clicked the link and downloaded something, and it had asked for calendar access, and she had given it, because he had said it would sync reservations. And she had been at that point, still in the stage of wanting to seem agreeable and uncomplicated. Her stomach dropped. I remember, she said carefully. The app is still on your phone. His voice dropped lower, faster. Inside it. It's not a restaurant app, obviously, Poppy. I'm sorry. I need you to trust me. Inside it, there's a data file, routing numbers, account information. It's worth a lot of money to some very specific people, and I need you to. You put something on my phone, Poppy said. It's not. You told me it was a restaurant recommendation app. Her voice had gone very quiet. You asked me to download it 6 weeks ago. You've been storing financial data on my phone for 6 weeks. Silence. Poppy, you used my phone as a hard drive. She looked at Dorian Ashby, who was watching her with an expression of focused, almost technical attention. Because you knew that if anyone searched your devices, they'd find it. But no one was going to search mine. She paused. Because no one was going to look at me. I needed. Derek started. Don't. The word was very clean. Don't tell me what you needed. Tell me where you are. I can't, Derek. Her voice was the voice she used when a vendor submitted an invoice with numbers that didn't add up, and she needed them to understand, without raising the emotional temperature, that she had found it and she was not going to unfind it. Tell me where you are, or I'm going to hand my phone to the man standing next to me and let him ask you. A long pause. What man? Poppy, who are you with? Dorian Ashby reached over, took the phone from her hand with a calm that was genuinely frightening, and put it to his own ear. Whatever he said it quietly. In the 18 seconds the call lasted, Derek Foss's location was provided. Ashby ended the call, handed the phone back to her, looked at Carver. South Waterfront. Pier 9. He's been there since 10. Carver left the kitchen. The brownstone reorganized itself around a new objective with the speed and efficiency of an organization that had done this many times before. Dorian Ashby looked at Poppy. You didn't have to do that, he said. The app is still on my phone, isn't it? She said, which means the data is still there. Yes, and it belongs to you. It does. She held her phone out to him. He looked at it for a moment, then at her face. We'll send the tech team up. They can extract it without. I know, she said, but I'm coming. Ashby went still. To the pier. He called me a hard drive, Poppy said. He called me a placeholder. He spent 6 weeks making me feel like someone worth showing up for, and the entire time I was a storage device he was too scared to carry himself. She held his gaze without flinching. I would like to be there. Dorian Ashby looked at her for a long, still moment. There was something happening in his expression that she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. It was not pity. It was not the complicated mix of curiosity and calculation he had worn since he first sat across from her at Sable and Stone. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. All right, he said. Pier 9 smelled of salt and rust and the particular cold of the Boston waterfront in late October. The fog came in low and fast off the harbor, reducing the dock lights to pale smears. Poppy stood at the entrance to the pier in her burgundy dress, Dorian Ashby's jacket over her shoulders. Charcoal wool, warm, smelling overwhelmingly of sandalwood, and watched the fog for shapes. Derek Foss appeared from behind a chain-link fence section, moving toward her, at a walk that wanted to be casual and wasn't. He was wearing the same suit from his profile photos. It looked like he had slept in it. His hair, which had been carefully tended in those photos, was damp and displaced. He looked like a man who had been very handsome recently and was no longer keeping up with the maintenance. He stopped 12 feet away when he saw her face. You came, he said. I wasn't sure you... Give me your phone, Poppy said. What? Your phone, Derek? The app you put on mine. You have a copy, don't you? A backup. She watched his eyes. She was very good at watching people's eyes. She had spent years making herself quiet enough in rooms that people forgot she was there, and that kind of invisibility was its own education. You wouldn't have built something like this without a redundancy. Derek's jaw worked. How do you even? Because I'm an accountant, she said. We check everything twice. Poppy. He took a step forward. His voice had shifted into something warmer, practiced, the tone she recognized from their first 3 weeks of texting. I know this is a lot. I know I owe you an explanation, but I need you to just... You called me a placeholder, she said. He stopped. In your head, she said. When you were planning this, you went through your options and you thought, who won't anyone question? Who can I put in that restaurant, in that booth, and have her sit there for 4 hours without anyone finding it strange that she's alone? The words came out steady and without performance. You chose me because you thought I was the kind of person no one would look at twice. Derek Foss had the particular expression of a man who was deciding how much of the truth he could afford to acknowledge. That's not. Did it work? Poppy asked. Were you right? He didn't answer. Enough, said a voice from behind her. Derek Foss looked up, and the color left his face in one swift, comprehensive movement. Dorian Ashby stepped out of the fog with the 4 men who had cleared Sable and Stone, and several additional men Poppy hadn't been introduced to yet. They materialized from the shadows of the dock, the way shadows do when they've been waiting long enough, simply and all at once. Dorian walked to Poppy's side and stood there. He did not touch her, he did not need to. The geometry of his positioning said everything that needed to be said. Foss, he said. His voice was entirely calm. Where's the backup drive? Derek's hands went up. Ashby. Boss? Listen, this was. The Halloran people. They approached me. I had no choice, they were going to. The drive, left jacket pocket. Derek's voice had gone small and rapid. It's all there. Every account. I didn't. I hadn't transferred anything yet. I swear to God. I was going to give it back. I was going to. One of Ashby's men stepped forward and took the drive from Derek's pocket with the brisk efficiency of someone collecting something that had never really stopped belonging to them. Dorian turned to Poppy, just slightly, just enough. His grey eyes found hers in the fog-diffused dock light, and there was something in them, the same quiet, unclassifiable thing she had seen in his kitchen, that made her breath go odd and brief. Well, he said. She understood the question. She looked at Derek Foss, who was shivering on the wet dock. 4 years of manufactured charm, stripped away to reveal a man who was simply, comprehensively afraid. She thought about the text messages. She thought about I love a woman with substance. She thought about the breadbasket and Calvin's pitying eyes, and 4 hours of carefully maintained dignity in a restaurant where she was always going to eat alone. She thought about being chosen, specifically and deliberately, for her invisibility. I don't want anything dramatic, she said. Her voice was very clear. I want him to understand that it didn't work, that he picked wrong. She paused. The rest is your business. Dorian Ashby held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at his men. A single tilt of his chin, a motion so small it barely qualified as a gesture. Take him, he said. Carver knows what to do. Derek started talking very fast. Nobody was listening. As his voice receded into the fog, absorbed by the harbor sounds in the distance, Poppy stood on Pier 9 in a borrowed coat and a dress that had cost her 3 weeks of discretionary spending, and looked out at the black water of Boston Harbor. Dorian Ashby stood beside her. He was wrong, he said, after a moment. I know, she said. About all of it. He was quiet for a beat, but specifically about the invisibility. She felt him look at her. You were the first thing I saw when I walked into that restaurant. You were standing up to leave, and you looked like someone who had decided something. He paused. I don't frequently notice things that aren't tactically relevant. Poppy considered this. Are you telling me I'm tactically relevant? I'm telling you, Dorian Ashby said, that I noticed you. The fog moved in off the harbor, cold and salt-smelling and absolute. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy bell rang twice. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. The account data is recovered, she said. Foss is handled. I'm not in danger anymore. She held his gaze. You don't have to protect me. No, he agreed. His hand came up, slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to step back, and his thumb traced the line along her jaw, brushing a strand of dark curl away from her cheek. I don't have to. His eyes dropped to her lips and then came back up, and there was nothing calculating in them now, nothing that evaluated or measured, just something that had decided. Come back with me, he said. Not an order this time. Not quite. Something that lived in the space between a request and a certainty. Not because you're exposed. Not because it's safer. He let the harbor noise fill the silence for a moment. Because I'd like you to. Poppy Vance had walked into Sable and Stone tonight, as a woman who had learned to move through the world as though apologizing for the space she occupied. She stood on Pier 9 in the fog and the cold, and looked at the most dangerous man in Boston, who was looking back at her like she was the only fixed point in the landscape. Okay, she said. He didn't smile, not quite, not the way ordinary men smiled, but something in his face changed, and it was better than a smile. He put his hand on the small of her back, warm and steady, and walked her off the pier and into the dark, and for the first time all night, she didn't feel like she was disappearing. She felt with a certainty that would take her months to fully understand, like she had just arrived.